Commander Hannah Park stood in silence before the towering window of the Galactic Council station, her eyes fixed on the sprawling silver towers that rose like spires against the black canvas of space. From this diplomatic outpost, 1,000 alien species governed the fate of the galaxy, and for the past 20 years, Earth had tried to earn a place among them. Even now, after decades of uneasy alliance and countless compromises, humanity was still seen as a provisional member, barely tolerated by the elder civilizations that measured their legacy in millennia. Hannah had adjusted her navy blue uniform, the single gold star on her collar marking her as Earth's chief military liaison. She was here to represent humanity at yet another bureaucratic summit, another round of discussions, trade arguments, and political maneuvering. What she didn't know then was that, by the end of the day, everything would change. Her aide approached quietly, holding a sleek alien datapad. "Commander, you've been summoned to Subchamber 17. It's listed as a resource allocation meeting, but it came directly from Counselor Reth's office." Hannah frowned. That wasn't on the official schedule. Reth was a rare ally, one of the few council members who had supported humanity's inclusion. If he was reaching out outside formal protocol, something was wrong. She moved quickly through the curved corridors of the council station, her boots echoing against the polished floors. When she entered the subchamber, it was empty. The only object in the room was a single data slate resting on the oval table. Instinct told her to be cautious. This felt like a setup. But as a soldier trained for unexpected threats, she pressed her hand to the tablet anyway. The screen flickered to life, displaying documents she shouldn't have access to, files encrypted far above her clearance level. And yet here they were, open and waiting. The first document made her blood run cold. Assessment of Human Expansion Threat, Final Recommendation. She read in disbelief. The report laid out a multi-phase strategy: containment protocols, information suppression, targeted sabotage. But the most horrifying revelation was the classification of humanity as a Class 1 destabilizing element due to their rapid technological evolution and what the Council described as a genetic predisposition toward aggression. In short, the Galactic Council no longer saw humanity as an ally, but as a threat that needed to be neutralized. Her hands trembled. She downloaded the files onto her personal device just as the chamber door slid open. Reth entered, his tall, blue-skinned form betraying visible distress. His four eyes blinked in sequence, a physiological sign of fear among his kind. "You found it," he said quietly. "What the hell is this, Reth?" Hannah snapped. "Is this official?" He nodded, pain etched across his alien features. "It was approved last month. I only discovered it yesterday. They're calling it the Humanity Containment Protocol." Hannah's heart pounded. "When does it begin?" "Today," he said. "That's why I called you. I've risked everything to bring you here. This plan. It's not just containment. They're using a fabricated biothreat as a pretext. They've declared your colonies a biological hazard. The ships they've sent to quarantine are armed for orbital bombardment." She tried to activate her communicator, but the signal was jammed. Panic started to rise in her throat. "You need to get back to your ship," Reth said, pressing a keycard into her hand. "Take the maintenance corridors. I'll create a distraction." "Why are you helping us?" she asked. "Because this is wrong," he answered simply, "and because I believe your species deserves a chance." Hannah ran. The data pad burned in her pocket as she wove through dimly lit service tunnels, hiding as security patrols stormed past. In just minutes, the station had transformed from a diplomatic hub into a fortified command center. By the time she reached her ship, her crew was already scrambling into action. The pilot looked up from the console. "Commander, we've lost all official channels to Earth and the colonies. Something's happening." "Prepare for immediate departure," she ordered. "We leave now, but the station isn't granting clearance." "We're not asking for permission," she snapped. As the engines roared to life and the ship disengaged from the dock, Hannah looked out the viewport one last time. The spires of the Galactic Council, once a symbol of unity and peace, now cast a long, dark shadow across humanity's future. The The ship's engines groaned under the strain as Commander Hannah Park leaned over the navigation console, her jaw tight with focus. They had just escaped the Galactic Council station by the skin of their teeth. But she'd stolen records of a genocidal plan disguised as a containment protocol weighed heavily in her pocket, but heavier still was the growing dread in her chest. Something was already happening. The Council wasn't just planning an attack. It had begun. Approaching New Harmony system, her pilot reported. Dropping out of FTL now. Hannah's stomach turned with the sudden deceleration. She looked out the viewport and her worst fears were confirmed. The space around New Harmony, Earth's largest off-world colony, was swarming with Council warships. Their engines glowed with energy, weapons hot and ready. The colony's orbital defense platforms, some of the most advanced humanity had built, were already gone, shattered into drifting debris. "They're already here," the tactical officer whispered. "Get me visuals," Hannah ordered, her voice razor-sharp. The main screen flickered to life. The image that appeared sucked the air from the room. New Harmony, once a beacon of human progress, was burning. Council dreadnoughts orbited the planet like vultures. One by one, they unleashed kinetic bombardment projectiles, moving at hypersonic velocities targeting cities with surgical precision. Each impact sent a shockwave across the surface. From orbit, they looked like tiny flashes. On the ground, each one represented thousands of lives snuffed out in an instant. "Are they targeting civilians?" one of the crew asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They're not just targeting them," Hannah said, struggling to stay composed. "They're exterminating them." For half an hour, they watched in horror. Transmission jammers blocked nearly all communication, but every so often a garbled cry would punch through calls for help, confused pleas, screams of disbelief. Then silence. Another flash. Another crater. "We're being hailed by a Council vessel," the comms officer reported. "Don't answer," Hannah said firmly. "Hold position, just beyond sensor range. Record everything." The pilot's hands trembled over the controls. "Commander, we can't help them. Not with just one ship." "I know," she replied quietly. "Set course for Earth. Maximum speed. We have to warn them before this happens again." The ship veered away from the Massacre, just as a Council dreadnought appeared ahead, massive, bristling with weaponry. "Weapons charging!" the tactical officer shouted. "Evasive maneuvers," Hannah barked. The pilot swung the ship hard, diving below the dreadnought's arc of fire. The engines screamed as they jumped erratically through space, weaving a chaotic trail designed to shake off pursuit. By sheer luck and skill, they escaped. But nothing could erase what they had seen. As they cleared the system, Hannah walked to the viewport one last time. New Harmony, once humanity's crown jewel, now looked like a dying ember. Its once glittering cities were gone, replaced by smoking craters. The atmosphere shimmered with fire and ash. "How many?" she asked, barely able to say the word. "Initial estimates." The science officer hesitated, swallowing hard. "Over 4 million dead. Likely more, rising by the hour." Hannah gripped the sides of the command chair, her knuckles white. Her mind spun with questions. How could this happen? How had humanity's trust been repaid with annihilation? What kind of order required the slaughter of innocents on such a scale? But deep beneath the grief, something else began to stir. Something colder, stronger. Rage. This wasn't war. This was execution. It wasn't a failed negotiation or a skirmish gone too far. It was genocide carefully orchestrated and unanimously approved by those in power. And it wouldn't end here. The stolen Council documents revealed that New Harmony was only Phase 1. 6 more colonies had been marked for elimination. Council ships had already been dispatched. Earth, the heart of humanity, was still untouched for now. Reith had said some within the Council had opposed a direct strike on Earth. Perhaps they feared retaliation. Or perhaps they thought crushing the outposts would be enough to break humanity's will. They were wrong. "Record everything," Hannah ordered, her voice steely and resolute. "Every sensor reading, every transmission. The world needs to know what happened here. And when they reached Earth, they would tell the truth, not just about the massacre, but about the betrayal at the highest level. The Council hadn't underestimated humanity's strength. They'd underestimated its memory, its fury, its ability to rise from ashes and rebuild not just stronger, but smarter. As the ship faded into the black void of space, carrying survivors and the seeds of resistance, Hannah made a quiet vow. This wasn't the end of humanity. It was the beginning of the reckoning. 3 months had passed since the massacre at New Harmony, but for Admiral Hannah Park, it might as well have been yesterday. The images were burned into her memory, the flashing lights of orbital bombardment, the crackling screams over half-jammed transmissions, the eerie silence afterward. They haunted her in every quiet moment, and yet she didn't have the luxury of mourning. Humanity didn't. Not anymore. Not anymore. She stood now at the observation deck of Sanctuary Base, a hidden outpost carved into a drifting asteroid in a dense, uncharted debris field. Through the reinforced glass, she watched as 3 mismatched ships, refugees from other colonies, drifted in for docking. Every vessel that found them was both a miracle and a reminder. A miracle that they were still alive, a reminder of how many more weren't. Behind her, a young officer cleared his throat. "Admiral, the Defense Council is ready for you." She gave a small nod and turned away from the viewport. Her Navy coat hung heavier these days, not just from its physical weight, but from the provisional rank stitched onto the collar Admiral. She hadn't earned it in a classroom or at an academy. She'd earned it the day Earth's military leadership was vaporized in a peace summit turned ambush. The command center inside Sanctuary Base was rough, more bunker than bridge. Exposed rock made up the walls, and cables snaked across the floor like veins. But despite its crude construction, this place had become the beating heart of humanity's survival. Colonel T. Kim stood beside the central display as she entered, his face unreadable as he delivered grim news. Polaris colony has gone silent. No response to repeated hails. "Confirmed destroyed?" Hannah asked. "No," he said. "But we know the pattern. We should assume the worst." A map lit up with red markers fallen colonies. New Harmony, Arcturus, Vega Reach, now Polaris, 8 and counting. "They're not just taking out our strongholds," said Dr. Jinquan, the base's lead scientist, speaking up from his workstation. His once pristine lab coat was stained, evidence of weeks of sleepless work. "They're hunting us, every outpost, every settlement. Systematically." "Then why hasn't Earth been hit?" someone asked a former governor of a now-gone mining colony. Jin tapped a few keys and brought up a classified file. "According to intercepted data from our initial escape, a small faction within the Council species like the Alacrin and Volder opposed the genocide. They threatened to leave the Council if Earth was attacked directly. That, and Earth still has the largest fleet and most sophisticated defenses. They're picking off the easier targets first," Colonel T said flatly. "But they'll come for Earth eventually." "Which buys us time," Hannah replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "And we're going to use every second of it." The next few hours were spent discussing resource shortages, supply routes, and refugee integration. It was a balancing act, military operations and civilian survival, but there was a shared undercurrent in the room now, not just desperation. Something else. Determination. That night, Hannah found herself in Dr. Jinquan's lab. The space was a cluttered maze of alien devices captured, salvaged, or stolen from battlefield. It smelled like scorched metal and stress. "You said you found something?" Hannah prompted, stepping around a pile of disassembled council tech. "Yes," Jin said, his exhaustion momentarily giving way to excitement. He gestured to a sleek helmet connected to a glowing alien interface. "Watch." He slipped it on and closed his eye. The holographic display came to life, displaying streams of alien code and system schematics. "Council technology is partially psionic," he explained. "Their dominant species evolved with weak telepathic abilities, so most of their tech interfaces with thought pattern. Nothing new there. So why are you so excited?" Jin removed the helmet and handed her a tablet. Because human minds don't work like theirs. Our thought patterns are chaotic, associative, and non-linear. When we interface with their systems, we don't just use them, we confuse them. Their systems register our neural activity as errors, unpredictable fluctuation. Can we hack them? Not just hack, he said, eyes shining. We can access hidden subsystems, fail-safes, ancient code, buried command structures that they've forgotten exist. Things even they can't reach anymore. Realization dawned on Hannah's face. That's why they fear us. Exactly. It's not just our weapons or our growth. It's that we break their rules of biology, of technology, of order. We don't fit into their system. So their system is breaking. The implications were enormous. Council warships, communications hubs, weapon systems, all vulnerable. Not through brute force, but through human unpredictability. Just then, an alert sounded. Colonel T entered the lab, eyes sharp. One of our scout teams found a civilian transport hiding in the Sirius debris field. Council hunters are moving in. Our fighters are engaging to buy time. The three of them rushed to the command room. On the screen, 3 human fighters danced through space against a larger council vessel, darting between asteroids. They were outgunned, but using the field for cover with deadly skill. One ship exploded, another turned and rammed the council ship, disabling its sensors. The third struck a killing blow. The transport jumped to safety. The lone surviving fighter didn't flee. It turned and fired again, this time directly into the council ship's life support. No mercy. T watched in silence, just like they left none of ours. Hannah didn't argue. She didn't need to. The war had changed them all. That night, in a dim meeting room carved from rock, Hannah sat across from T and Jin. "We're not just going to survive anymore," she said. "We're going to fight back, with their own weapons." Jin smiled tiredly. "We'll call it Operation Prometheus. Stealing fire from the god." And with that, the resistance was born. The air in Dr. Jinquan's lab was thick with tension, the kind that settled over long hours and unspoken possibilities. A faint hum filled the space, interrupted only by the quiet click of alien components being adjusted on a cluttered table. Jinquan, hunched over an alien neural interface helmet, barely glanced up when Admiral Hannah Park entered. "You said it was urgent," she began, folding her arms. Jin looked up with a spark in his eye. He was gaunt from stress and long nights, his lab coat stained and wrinkled, but there was a certain light in him that hadn't been there in weeks. "It is. I've found something big." Hannah stepped closer, eyeing the sleek, organic design of the helmet, clearly council tech, salvaged from one of the recent raids. It was connected by dozens of thin neural cables to a partially disassembled command module glowing faintly with alien glyphs. "Watch this," Jin said, slipping the helmet on. He closed his eyes. Instantly, the alien console lit up, holographic symbols swirling into patterns above it. At first, it looked routine, just another data stream. But then the system stuttered. The glyphs glitched, flickering erratically. The console's internal defense protocols activated, then deactivated themselves just as quickly, unable to lock onto the intruding thought signals. Jin removed the helmet and let out a slow breath. That shouldn't happen. Their systems are designed to recognize only specific telepathic inputs from authorized council species. This, he gestured to the malfunctioning console, was confused. "Confused?" Hannah echoed. "The council built their technology to be intuitive to them. It's layered, old systems stacked beneath new ones, controlled through precise, learned mental pathways like trained muscle memory," Jin explained. "But humans don't think like that. Our thoughts are chaotic, associative, non-linear. So when a human mind interfaces with their systems, it doesn't follow the expected path. We don't open doors, they open by accident." Hannah studied the readout. "You're saying we can bypass their security?" Jin gave a nod, a grin tugging at the corners of his tired face. "Not just bypass. We can access subsystems they don't even know are there, emergency override functions, dormant protocols, ghost code from legacy systems built thousands of years ago. Their tech isn't prepared for us because we're not predictable. It was a revelation that hit Hannah like a punch to the chest. For months, they'd been outgunned, outnumbered, and scattered. But this was a key. A way to fight back from inside their systems. Jin continued, excitement growing in his voice. Their neural interfaces are like locked doors with combination codes. But our brains don't try to guess the code. We melt the lock with noise, and sometimes by sheer accident we stumble into rooms even the architects forgot existed. What about security? She asked. Oh, they detect us kind of, he replied. But their systems register human neural signals as anomalies, glitches, something they can't define. And here's the kicker: errors leave traces. Every time we access their systems, we leave a signature they can't erase. Hannah arched an eyebrow. That's bad. That's good, Jin countered, because now they know. Every time we touch their tech, we remind them. We're in their systems, we're under their skin. The implications were staggering. If human minds could subvert council firewalls, they could seize control of weapons, navigation arrays, and communication hubs. Every ship, every station, every battlefield could turn in humanity's favor if they played it right. And the council knew it. That's why they feared us, Hannah said quietly. Not because we're violent or fast-moving, but because we're incompatible with their order. Our minds don't fit their systems. Jin nodded. To them, that's the ultimate threat. It's not just physical dominance, it's conceptual chaos. Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent alert from the command center. Colonel T stormed in moments later. One of our scout ships picked up a distress signal from a transport in the Sirius debris field. Council hunters are closing in. Our fighters are moving to intercept. They rushed to the operations room. On screen, 3 human fighters were weaving through the debris cloud, engaging a larger council patrol ship. The odds weren't good. The enemy had superior firepower, but the humans had guts, desperation, and now, more than ever, purpose. One fighter took a direct hit and exploded. The second made a suicidal dive, smashing sensors. The third took advantage of the distraction, ducked into the ship's blind spot, and launched a pinpoint strike that crippled the engines. The civilian transport jumped to safety. But the surviving fighter didn't leave. Instead, it doubled back and fired again, this time at the council ship's life support systems. It didn't stop until no one was left alive aboard the enemy vessel. No survivor. Colonel T watched in silence. Just like they left, none of ours. Hannah didn't protest. Not anymore. The war had changed them. Later, as the lab lights flickered low, Hannah sat with Jin and T once more. The resistance was just beginning. They had no fleets, no vast armies. But now, they had something better. A crack in the enemy's armor. And the mind of a human being, wild and unchained, slipping through the crack. The atmosphere in the main hall of Sanctuary Base was heavy. Not with despair, but with something hard to resolve. The last few months had been hell. Humanity had lost 8 colonies, over 10 million lives, and nearly all of its official leadership. But now, standing shoulder to shoulder in this carved-out asteroid stronghold, the survivors were no longer just survivors. They were resistance. Admiral Hannah Park stood before them, dressed not in ceremonial regalia, but in her combat uniform, still scorched from recent field operations. She looked out at the crowd, former colonists, soldiers, engineers, scientists, children of the dead. Their faces were tired, their bodies worn, but their eyes were unbroken. For 3 months, Hannah began, her voice steady but fierce. We've been running, watching as everything we built was turned to ash. Our homes, our families, our dreams. Silence. Not because they were numb, but because every word was true. They thought they could eliminate us, she continued, that we'd go quietly, that if they struck fast enough, hard enough, we'd shatter. She paused, eyes scanning the room. They were wrong. A murmur moved through the crowd, not applause, but something deeper, a hum of awakening purpose. We don't run anymore, Hannah said. Starting today, we fight back. Behind her, Dr. Jinquan activated the holoscreen, projecting a series of schematics and encrypted overlays maps, raids, technology diagrams. At the top of the display was the mission's code name, Operation Prometheus. "We've spent the last 2 months studying their technology," Jin began, addressing the crowd. "Their systems rely on psionic-based input mental patterns hardwired into their culture. But humans interact with their tech in completely unpredictable ways. Our minds trigger hidden subroutines, emergency overrides, legacy functions even the Council forgot existed. In other words, humanity could turn their greatest weakness, being the odd species out, into an overwhelming advantage. Council systems were built to reject anything that didn't follow their mental logic," Jin continued. "But our brains don't follow logic. We improvise. We associate. We think in metaphors. That makes us dangerous." Colonel T. Kim stepped forward next. His voice was hard and cold. "Prometheus will begin with a series of raids targeting remote council outposts, research facilities, and supply stations. Our objective isn't conquest. It's disruption. We'll capture equipment, gather intelligence, and cripple their ability to recover. And we'll do it with their own tools," Hannah added. "We've already reprogrammed several captured council vessels using Jin's neural interface system. Human pilots can now control them as if they were ours. Their defense grids don't recognize us as threats until it's too late." The first raids were already in motion. 20 soldiers sat in silence aboard a stolen council transport, drifting toward an isolated research facility orbiting a gas giant. They wore repurposed armor, modified for stealth, and carried weapons that combined human engineering with alien tech. 4 minutes to docking, the pilot announced. Colonel T moved down the aisle, locking eyes with each soldier. They were farmers, miners, programmers, pilots. None of them had signed up for war. But war had found them, and now they fought with precision and fury. "Remember," T said, "we don't need to win a war today. We just need to show them it started." The council station didn't even realize it was under attack until it was too late. 2 security officers boarded the ship for a standard inspection. They didn't get a word out before being neutralized. Within 5 minutes, the docking bay was secured. The human strike team flowed into the facility like smoke through cracks, disabling systems, avoiding direct confrontation when possible, moving with the efficiency of phantoms. At Sanctuary, Hannah monitored 6 other simultaneous strikes across council space. Each team had a clear goal: hit fast, extract data, and vanish. Echo Team has secured the Riedel fuel station, a comms officer reported. "No casualties. They're rigging it for demolition." "Mark it," Hannah responded, her eyes scanning the tactical display. "We're burning their resources one link at a time." Back on the research station, Colonel T reached the central lab. Council defenders had regrouped, but not in time. Jin's neural interface device was deployed, shutting off life support in one sector, tricking the station's AI into triggering a false fire alert in another. It was brutal. It was surgical, and it worked. "Data core secure," the tech officer confirmed. "We've got fleet assignments, ship schematics, even shield frequencies." T nodded. "Good. Plant charges. We leave in 2. As they exfiltrated, Jin's final code activated a long-forgotten emergency lockdown protocol buried in the council software. The station sealed itself, locking out reinforcements and initiating days-long quarantine procedures. They didn't just steal from the enemy, they turned their own fortress into a trap. Hours later, when the strike teams returned to Sanctuary Base, they were met with silence, then quiet cheers. Not of celebration, but of solidarity. For the first time since the genocide, humanity wasn't just reacting, they were shaping the war. And deep in the asteroid base, beneath layers of rock and debris, the Prometheus flame burned bright, stolen from the gods, and now in human hands. The war had changed. What began as a desperate struggle for survival had evolved into a campaign of precision. Operation Prometheus had taught humanity that brute strength wasn't their only weapon. Unpredictability, adaptability, and their unique mental interface with Council technology had opened doors they never expected. But now, they needed something more than disruption. They needed a statement of victory the galaxy couldn't ignore. Admiral Hannah Park stood at the central display inside Sanctuary Base's command center, reviewing mission parameters with a grim expression. Before her was the schematic of a high-value Council target. A quantum communication hub buried deep inside a fortified installation in the Vega sector. This facility didn't just relay information, it coordinated entire fleets across a third of the Council's territory. If we take this intact, Dr. Jingquan explained, pointing to the core relay schematic, we won't just hear their plans, we can reroute their orders, jam their signals, and inject false commands into their fleet networks. Colonel T. Kim crossed his arm. And if they figure it out, then we'll already be gone, Hannah answered, eyes hard. Or we'll be in control. The operation was named Broken Crown, a symbol of what it aimed to do: fracture the Council's air of untouchable superiority. 3 captured Council vessels, heavily modified with Jin's neural interface systems, formed the strike fleet. Human pilots trained for weeks to synchronize with the alien control systems. Every system had been reprogrammed to respond to human minds. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't stable, but it worked. "We're approaching the Vega system," T reported from the lead ship, his voice coming through on a secure channel. "All systems nominal. No signs of detection." The vessels split into 3 vectors, each transmitting stolen maintenance codes obtained from earlier raids. They approached the installation disguised as routine service transports. For a moment, it worked. The outer defenses remained dormant. The automated docking systems even initiated guidance procedures. Then, as they closed to within a few kilometers, something clicked. "Unidentified vessels," a Council voice crackled over the comm. "Your codes are invalid. Halt immediately or be fired upon." "Too late," T muttered. "Initiate interface systems. All ships engage." At once, Jin's neural interface activated across all 3 ships. Human minds synced to Council systems, feeding chaotic thought signals into targeting networks and defense grids. The automated platforms couldn't process, it couldn't even identify the intruders properly. Weapon turrets rotated away, shield barriers flickered. In a matter of seconds, the human fleet passed through what should have been impenetrable defenses. "We're in," T confirmed. "Docking now." Inside the installation, chaos erupted. Systems began malfunctioning, doors wouldn't open, alarms triggered at random, internal firewalls collapsed. By the time Council defenders realized they were under attack, human squads were already storming the central base. The battle was fierce, but quick. Lacking centralized coordination, Council forces fought in isolated clusters, while human teams, drilled, agile, and guided by real-time data, moved like one organism. In the control room, Colonel T surveyed the smoldering consoles and flickering screen. "Facility secured," he reported to Hannah. "Minimal casualties. All opposition neutralized." Back at Sanctuary, cheers erupted across the command center. It wasn't just another raid. This was different. They had taken one of the Council's most critical installations and held it. "Begin data extraction immediately," Hannah ordered. Priority on communication protocols, command hierarchies, and encryption systems. As Jin and his technicians combed through the alien databanks, the full scale of the victory became clear. The hub stored real-time fleet deployments, high-level diplomatic transmissions, internal Council descent logs, everything. "Admiral," Jin said softly, "this changes everything. We're not just intercepting anymore. We're inside their nervous system." Across the galaxy, the ripples began almost immediately. The Council tried to contain the news, but word spread. A military communications hub had fallen. Their encrypted orders had been intercepted. Their fleets were turning up late, misdirected, or worse, ambushed. Commanders hesitated. Species once loyal to the Council began to whisper. "They're starting to fear us," T remarked, standing beside Hannah at the viewport. Not because we're strong, but because we understand them now better than they understand us. Hannah nodded slowly. The crown has cracked. Days later, intelligence confirmed what they had hoped. The Council's inner circle was fracturing. Some member species had begun withdrawing political and military support. Internal blame was spreading like wildfire, and humanity, once written off as a mistake of evolution, was now the center of every conversation. They had turned a symbol of domination into a monument of defiance. Operation Broken Crown wasn't just a success. It was a turning point, and the galaxy would never be the same. A year had passed since New Harmony burned. In that time, humanity had transformed. What remained of its people, once scattered and broken, had hardened into a resistance forged by fire and loss. The Council had hoped to erase humanity from the stars. Instead, they had created something far more dangerous, an enemy with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. In the war room aboard the command ship Resolute Dawn, Admiral Hannah Park stood before a holographic display of the Krell homeworld. Behind her, representatives from the United Fleet gathered military officers from Earth, surviving colonies, and rebel outposts. On the screen, orbital platforms ringed the planet like a crown. That crown was their next target. 1 year ago, Hannah said, her voice low but unwavering, the Krell led the attack that massacred millions of our people. Their High Counselor signed the extermination order. Today, we send a message. The mission was called Operation Nemesis. It wasn't a raid. It wasn't about supply lines or disruption. It was vengeance delivered through precision. Colonel T. Kim stood to Hannah's right, reviewing tactical overlays. His expression was carved from stone. The man had buried his family on New Harmony, and now he would lead the team tasked with capturing High Counselor Varric alive. You understand the objective? Hannah asked quietly. I do, T replied, his voice tight. We bring him back breathing. The fleet, composed of 47 ships, some Terran, others retrofitted Council vessels, would use blind spots in the Council surveillance network to approach undetected. The key was a new device engineered by Dr. Jin Quan, the Nemesis Protocol. This changes the game, Jin explained earlier. Nemesis doesn't just intercept signals, it injects corrupted data directly into the Council's quantum network, forcing AI systems to revert to basic, disconnected protocols. Their ships can't coordinate. Their platforms can't target. For 37 minutes, we blind and deafen their war machine. More than enough time, Hannah had said. When the fleet dropped into the Krell system, the plan went into motion like clockwork. The Nemesis device unleashed a wave of interference that cascaded through the network. Defense platforms shut down. Patrol ships lost contact with Central Command. Entire battle groups drifted without orders, paralyzed by the sudden silence. All ships, commence attack, Hannah ordered. The human fleet surged forward, striking with brutal precision. Unlike the Council's attacks on human colonies, this strike was deliberate and restrained. Civilian zones were bypassed. Only military targets burned. On the planet's surface, T led a 12-person infiltration team through the forested perimeter of Varric's estate. Their gear was silent, their movements rehearsed. Using data from the quantum hub captured during Operation Broken Crown, they had mapped every detail of the compound. Security grid is down, the tech specialist reported. We've got 7 minutes before backup systems activate. They slipped through gaps in surveillance, disabling guards with non-lethal neural disruptors. Reaching the second floor of the estate, they found Varric in his private chamber, attempting to send a distress signal. The High Counselor of the Krell was a towering figure, scaled, cold-eyed, and still wearing ceremonial robes. When he turned and saw human soldiers in his sanctuary, his expression twisted in disbelief. Impossible, he hissed, reaching for a concealed weapon. T fired first. Varric collapsed, paralyzed but alive. Standing over him, T's hand hovered near his sidearm. A single pull of the trigger, and justice, at least a certain kind of it, would be done. For his wife, For his children? For all the dead? But he didn't pull it. "Secure the prisoner," he ordered. "We're done here." In orbit, the Krell fleet tried to regroup, but the secondary Nemesis devices disrupted their command channels again. Ships turned into confusion, orders contradicted themselves. Coordination fell apart. The Resolute Dawn intercepted communications from Krell Command, desperate, panicked, incoherent. "High Counselor secured," the comms officer reported. Hannah allowed herself a breath. "We've made our point," she said. "Begin withdrawal." As the fleet jumped out of the Krell system, they left behind a shattered defense grid, burning installations, and a stunned council. But they also left untouched cities, hospitals, and schools. It was a deliberate contrast. A line drawn in fire, humanity sought justice, not extermination. Back aboard the command ship, Varric was brought to Hannah under heavy guard. He stood tall despite the restraints, his tone full of contempt. "Do you expect me to beg for mercy?" "No," Hannah said coldly. "I expect you to answer for genocide." He scoffed. "You are chaos. You disrupt the order we built over millennia." "And yet here you are," she replied, "captured, alone, while your fleets fall apart." Colonel T approached as Varric was led away. "He should be executed," T said quietly. "He deserves it. He will face justice," Hannah said firmly. "A trial, a tribunal, public judgment. That's what sets us apart." Later, as the fleet regrouped, news spread like wildfire across the galaxy. The Krell homeworld had fallen. Its leaders captured. Its defenses shattered. The Council's silence broke as member species began to defect, refusing to support further violence. The illusion of unity was gone. And humanity, once nearly wiped out, now stood not as victims, but as warriors. As a people who had survived the fire, and who now carried it forward not to burn the stars but to rewrite what power truly looked like. 18 months ago, the Galactic Council tried to erase humanity from existence. Now, they were sitting across the table. The Grand Chamber aboard Unity Station, a neutral site orbiting Earth, was filled with the tension of 1,000 unsaid truths. On one side sat representatives from 23 human colonies and refugee settlements. On the other, delegates from 14 council species, their alien features betraying discomfort, apprehension, and perhaps most surprising, respect. Admiral Hannah Park entered the room without fanfare. She wore her combat uniform, its sleeves scorched, collar faded, and insignia dulled from the war. None of it was repaired. She wanted them to see what survival had cost. She took her place at the head of the human delegation. "Let's begin," she said. "You've presented your terms for peace. It's time we present ours." Dr. Jing Quan rose, activating a holographic display. "Your proposed technology transfer is generous. Access to your gravitic engineering would advance our infrastructure by decades," he acknowledged. An Alacrisian delegate leaned forward, his translator conveying his insect-like speech. "We offer these gifts in good faith, as the beginning of reparations." Colonel T. Kim, seated beside Hannah, didn't hide his disdain. His eyes were cold as he responded, "No technology can bring back the millions slaughtered. No amount of good faith can rebuild what was destroyed in a single afternoon of orbital fire." "We do not suggest otherwise," the Alacrisian said calmly. "But reconciliation must begin somewhere." Each voice sharpened. "When the architects of genocide still hold power in your council. That's not reconciliation, that's pretending." Hannah raised a hand, quieting the room. "Our terms are simple," she said. "Justice, accountability, and change." She laid them out, one by one. The dissolution of the Inner Council, the shadow group that had authorized the massacre. Open review of all future council decisions affecting member species. Substantial reparations to rebuild the destroyed human colonies. And most importantly, full recognition of human sovereignty. There was murmuring among the aliens. A Volder representative, his voice silky and cool, leaned in. "These are not small demands." "No," Hannah agreed. "They're not. because what you did wasn't a small mistake. It was genocide. And what of High Counselor Varric? Another delegate asked cautiously. Surely he's of value to you as a bargaining chip. Hannah's reply was immediate. He and the others who signed the extermination order must stand trial. Not in a human court, in an interspecies tribunal broadcast openly. Justice must be seen by all, especially your people. They caused visible discomfort. The council had never publicly tried one of their own. But this was not the same council anymore. As negotiations dragged on over the following weeks, cracks in the alien alliance widened. Some species demanded a full withdrawal from the war. Others resisted the tribunal clause. Within the human camp, too, there were divisions. Some colonies refused to sign any peace accord that left council species untouched. Others pushed for complete secession from galactic politics. In private, the debate was just as intense. We're giving up too much, T said one night in Hannah's quarters. We have momentum. We could push further. Force a collapse. And then what? Hannah asked. Occupy half the galaxy. Police 1,000 species. That's not victory. That's a never-ending war. Jinquan nodded from the corner. Each battle we fight now costs lives we can't afford to lose. They're already fracturing. Peace on our terms gives us a future. T didn't answer at first. His grief was still raw, just beneath the surface. But after a long pause, he spoke quietly. I just want to know it wasn't for nothing. It wasn't, Hannah said. Not if we make sure it never happens again. 3 months after the final terms were accepted, the Treaty of New Terra was signed. The Inner Council was formally disbanded. A new representative body, the Reformed Galactic Alliance, was established, built on transparency and checks of power. Reparations were approved. Human sovereignty was recognized. And for the first time in galactic history, an interstellar tribunal was convened to try the perpetrators of genocide. Not everyone was satisfied. Some human factions wanted blood, others isolation. But most knew this was the best outcome they could have fought for. At the rebuilt colony of New Harmony, now slowly rising from ashes, a memorial garden was dedicated. Delegates from former enemy species stood beside human survivors, placing soil from their homeworlds into the foundation, a symbol of unity, however fragile. Hannah stood before the crowd, the setting sun casting golden light across the reflective surface of the new memorial pool. They feared us because we were unpredictable, she said. Because we changed, but that adaptability, the thing they tried to destroy, is what saved us. And it's what will save others, too. She paused, letting the moment settle. This memorial is not only for the dead. It's for what they lived for our capacity to rise, to rebuild, to find hope where others see only chaos. The Council misunderstood what makes us human. They thought rage was our defining trait. She looked across the gathered faces, human and alien alike. But it's hope that built this world again, and hope that will keep the stars safe from ever knowing such darkness again. 3 months had passed since the Treaty of New Terra was signed, and the galaxy was still learning how to live with the silence that followed war. On the surface of New Harmony, once the jewel of human colonization, later reduced to ash and ruined construction, had resumed. Towers once shattered by orbital strikes were being rebuilt with sturdier alloys. Craters where families had died were now filled with foundation stone. And in the heart of the colony, beside what would become a memorial garden, a crowd had gathered. Admiral Hannah Park stood at the edge of the construction site, the sun dipping low behind her. The warm glow cast long shadows across freshly laid steel and glass. Her uniform was clean but unadorned. She had chosen not to wear medals today. This wasn't a celebration of victory. It was a tribute to survival and a promise that the fallen would not be forgotten. Dr. Jinquan stood beside her, arms folded as he watched the workers in the distance. It's hard to believe, he said quietly. 18 months ago, we were hiding in a rock field just trying to stay alive. Now look at us. We did more than survive, Hannah replied. We changed the course of galactic history. The treaty had reshaped everything. The Inner Council, the secretive body that had ordered the genocide, was dissolved. An interstellar tribunal was underway, preparing to try those responsible in front of a unified audience of galactic species. Reparations had begun to flow, resources, medical aid, and the release of all human prisoners still held in Council territories. But not all wounds healed evenly. Colonel T. Kim arrived late to the ceremony, his expression unreadable as he approached. Though the war was over, he hadn't yet found peace. For soldiers like him, peace wasn't a goal. It was a question mark, something foreign and unwelcome after so many months of relentless purpose. "The tribunal begins next week," he said as he joined them. "They've asked me to testify about New Harmony, about what we found after the attack." "Will you do it?" Hannah was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "My family deserves justice," he said, "not just vengeance. I'm starting to understand the difference." The ceremony that followed was quiet and solemn. There were no parades, no speeches filled with patriotic fervor. Instead, representatives from each human colony, those that survived and those still rebuilding, stepped forward with soil gathered from their homeworld. One by one, they poured it into the foundation of the memorial garden, a symbolic gesture of unity. More moving still was the presence of alien delegate. Former enemies stood unarmed and unguarded, side by side with humans. Some carried artifacts of apology tokens, words, even hands offered in silent understanding. Not every human welcomed their presence, but no one challenged it. That, too, was sign of change. When it was time for Hannah to speak, she walked slowly to the podium. The crowd fell silent, the only sound the soft wind moving across the high plain. 18 months ago, she began, we faced extinction. Our colonies were burning, our people were scattered, our name was almost erased from the stars. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. But we didn't disappear. We adapted, we resisted, and because of that today we rebuild. She gestured to the memorial garden behind her. This place will honor our dead, but it will also stand for something greater. For hope. For unity. For the truth that what makes us human is not just our rage or our strength, but our refusal to be defined by tragedy. She looked to the alien delegates. They feared us because we were unpredictable, because we didn't follow the rules they had written. But the truth is, our unpredictability saved us, and it may save them too. As she stepped down, a hush hung in the air, not of confusion, but reflection. Later that evening, the three leaders of the resistance, Hannah, Jin, and T, stood near the edge of the settlement, watching the new structures rise under floodlights. "What do you think happens now?" Jin asked. Hannah looked up toward the stars, where a reformed Galactic Alliance observation ship floated at a respectful distance, watching but not interfering. "Now we remember," she said, "and we rebuild, and we make damn sure this never happens again, to anyone." T was quiet for a while, then finally spoke, his voice low. "My wife used to say New Harmony was humanity's best self. Not because it was perfect or big, but because it was built on cooperation, on beliefs." He took a slow breath, his eyes scanning the buildings rising from what was once ash. "If we can rebuild it better, if we can make it more than it ever was, then maybe that's how we honor them. Not through revenge, but by proving we never stopped believing in who we are." Behind them, the memorial garden began to take shape, a circle of light and stone and soil from across human space. Above them, stars continued their silent watch. Some held stories of pain, others the promise of peace. And between them stood a rebuilt people, scarred, wiser but unbroken. The war was over, the ashes had settled. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the stars didn't look threatening, they looked like a future again. From the edge of the memorial garden on New Harmony, Admiral Hannah Park gazed upward, her eyes tracing constellations she hadn't seen since before the war. Not because they'd vanished, but because she'd been too focused on survival to notice them. Tonight, they felt close, familiar, like the universe was finally listening. All around her, The newly rebuilt colony buzzed with quiet life. Construction drones moved steadily across the horizon. Lights blinked from prefab towers. Laughter rose faintly from a group of children chasing each other near the garden's edge. It wasn't much, but it was life, and it was theirs. "Admiral," a young officer said, approaching with a respectful nod. "They're ready for your remarks." Hannah nodded and stepped toward the central platform. It was a simple structure, no banners, no fanfare, just a raised stone circle beneath a vast, open sky. As she reached the podium, the crowd fell silent. Humans stood shoulder to shoulder with representatives from former enemy species. Their differences, biological, cultural, even historical, seemed less important now. What united them wasn't shared biology, but a shared truth. They had all seen what war could do. And they had all survived it together. Hannah looked out over them, her voice calm but firm. 18 months ago, the Galactic Council tried to extinguish humanity's light from the stars. They failed. Not just because we fought harder than they expected, but because they misunderstood what makes us who we are. She gestured gently toward the garden around them, a blend of human and alien flora, stones engraved with the names of the fallen, and a reflecting pool now filled with fresh water. "We are not just warriors. We are builders. We are dreamers. We are survivors." Her voice didn't rise, but it carried. They feared us because we didn't fit their definition of order, because we changed too quickly, questioned too often, and refused to be controlled. To them, that was chaos, but to us, that's freedom. That's humanity. She paused, letting the quiet stretch before continuing. "This memorial will not only honor our dead, it will remind us what they lived for the right to be different, for the courage to stand alone when needed, and the strength to reach out when it matters most." As she spoke, stars began to appear overhead, shimmering in the reflecting pool below. They mirrored the silent witnesses above, the same stars that had watched over humanity's darkest hour and now bore witness to its renewal. "We refused to be defined by our pain," Hannah said softly. "Instead, we became something more. We became a reminder to this galaxy that resilience isn't just about surviving, it's about rising. And helping others rise, too." She looked toward the Alacrian and Volder delegates standing in quiet reverence near the front. "The Council feared our adaptability, but in the end, that's what saved us. That's what the galaxy needs now, adaptability. Compassion, the willingness to become something new." There were no cheers, no applause, just stillness. A shared breath. A mutual understanding. As the ceremony concluded, Hannah stepped back from the podium and rejoined Dr. Jing Quan and Colonel T. Kim. They stood together as they had so many times before on battlefields, in bunkers, aboard silent ships in enemy space. But now, there was no urgency in their eye. Only reflection. Only reflection. "What do you think happens next?" Jin asked, watching a group of council delegates quietly exchanging handshakes with human colonists. Hannah smiled faintly. "Now we rebuild, we remember, and we make sure it never happens again." T stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "My wife used to say New Harmony was our greatest achievement. Not because it was beautiful or big, but because it was built by people who believed in something bigger than themselves." He looked out across the colony, lights flickering like stars reborn on the ground. "I think rebuilding it better than before is how we honor her. How we honor all of them." The wind moved through the garden like a whispered promise. From orbit, the reformed Galactic Alliance's observation ship floated silently, giving space watching not as an overlord, but as a guest. Across Council territory, the trials continued. Leaders were being held accountable. New policies were being written in the shadow of old mistakes. And back here, on this soil once marked by fire, children were planting seeds in a garden grown from grief and watered with resilience. Later that night, Hannah returned to her quarters overlooking the main settlement. Before turning in, she looked up at the stars one last time. They hadn't changed, but humanity had. No longer victims. No longer outside. They were something the galaxy hadn't expected. A people who endured the unthinkable and still believed in something better. a people who had every right to burn the world down and instead chose to rebuild it. The galaxy would remember the rage that had once driven humanity to rise, but it would never forget the hope that helped them endure.